We are about to get started, so give us just 1 minute while we get set up here with our links.
You know what we need? We need a like just a big skirmisher title card that one of us can hold up in front of their camera and wiggle and do a little theme song. Da 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 da. Ba-da-da-da-da.
That's on
Actually,
you,
we
Will.
do that.
Well,
It's going to be the Infinity title card because this is the Infinity Live.
Oh, that's right. It is D Infinity
It
Live.
is the Infinity Live.
yeah,
Okay.
just don't do the song. Na, 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 na.
Yikes. Okay, we're still getting the link here. Bear with me for 1 minute.
We've got to do a show where we all wear fezzes,
That's a good idea.
For the funny
bow
hat
tie.
episode.
right?
Fezzes and bow ties, so that way we can all look like like Matt Smith in some capacity. With sonic screwdrivers too.
I'll make my own sonic screwdriver.
All right, so I've sent the link so that everybody has it. So now we're going to get started officially. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to D Infinity Live Volume 0. My name is Robert Groover, coming to you live from Houston, Texas. We also have Will Thrasher from Lexington, Kentucky.
Frankfurt now, actually.
Frankfurt, Kentucky.
State capital.
Thank you. We also have Richard Balsley from California. Welcome, Richard. And finally, we have Michael Varhola, owner and author of Skirmisher Publishing. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks.
How are things in Hill Country today, sir?
Things are going pretty well in Hill Country. Every day in God's country is a beautiful day.
That it is. Well, we're going to get started here with gaming news. Our first big topic tonight is Richard Balsley's Castle Builder Volume 3 has been released on Skirmisher Publishing. We're going to have a link right here that you can get to give you all the information on where you can get Volume 3 of Castle Builder. But I wanted to give Richard a few minutes here to tell us about the project and what Castle Builder is and what Castle Builder 3 is.
Okay, well, Castle Builder is essentially a series designed to help people, build their own structures in a fantasy setting. It covers anything basically from the earliest types of construction materials used all the way up to the Renaissance, and I took a building block approach to accommodate any kind of fantasy game that people may want to play. And so that was basically the point of the first volume, is to give everybody the rules that they needed to make their own to make their own structures without having to worry about whether or not it fit any particular model, so that way they could make what fit best for their campaign. And volume 2, I focused on what I considered probably the most important, or at least the most commonly used structure, which was the manor house. I mean, it's used for everything from warehouses to inns to the mayor's house, if you will, for most fantasy settings. So I figured, why not do that first? And it also was a great opportunity to show a building that didn't have to have any real defensive or offensive capabilities, but could still be used in that capacity if needed, since the book is mostly about strongholds in different shapes and forms. And so that was volume 2, and then the newest volume is basically a continuation of volume 2, in that it shows how to make that building structure more defensible by adding walls, a moat, and pillboxes. So the title of the book is Moat Houses and Pillboxes, because it's a house surrounded by a moat, and the sample structure that comes with it is essentially the outlying buildings surrounding one of the manor houses presented in Volume 2.
And I was really impressed with that. I thought that was pretty neat. I took a look at the maps you provided for Volume 3, and I said, oh, this is the Ellingsworth estate that you talked about in Volume 2. And essentially, what you present in Volume 3 are enhancements to your basic manor house, which could be a tavern or an inn or a country manor. So I thought that was a pretty elegant structure in terms of the way you structured the book.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and one of the things why I wanted to present that is because there are some fantasy series out there, like especially like the Wheel of Time series, where one of the towns actually has large manor house style buildings in the middle of the city, surrounded by walls. So I was like, okay, well, what better way to represent something like that than have a country estate that has defensible walls. I mean, they're taller than what you would probably find in a more Victorian style residence. But these are walls that are designed to repel invasions because the house itself is supposed to represent a center of governmental authority in the middle of nowhere. So it's a rural setting, but it has to have some kind of defense for the area it controls.
And that's not just a fantasy thing either. I mean, if you look at Renaissance Italy, a city like Florence, all the great families had an urban manor house that was surrounded by the kinds of structures that you talk about, because the city itself was a very dangerous environment, and one family was being subject to being attacked by another. So historically, the model you present, of course, is very accurate and relevant as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's that, and I mean, if you look at some of the structures like you're talking about in Florence, especially with the house for the Borgias, it had a lot of those defensive elements built into it. But rather than having just a defensive perimeter wall, the walls themselves in some of those buildings were thicker than they would have been otherwise, and essentially the entrance to the courtyard was what a gatehouse is, and since that's the main part of the entry point for the manor house, or that's been turned into a moat house, I figured that this would be a good way to represent those as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And Mike, you wrote City Builder, which is sort of the ancestor of Castle Builder, and I've always said it shows when we've done shows together that City Builder is that book that sits next to the Dungeon Master Guide.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm ready to design something, a city, with all its buildings, I go to City Builder and I use that as my design element. Do you see that same kind of thing with Castle Builder that you created in City Builder?
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, when Richard and I started talking in earnest last year about publishing Castle Builder, what I said to him was that City Builder was Skirmisher Publishing's most successful book to date. We have done better with it than with any other book that we have. And we had a very particular publishing model with it. We released each of the 11 volumes of City Builder individually. Each of them is a different thematic volume. So there's a volume on mercantile places. There's a volume on governmental places, a volume on underworld places. We released each of them individually, and then we consolidated them into a single book. And just the way we structured that release over a year was very satisfactory to our readers, and it really ended up allowing us to produce a high-quality, successful book. So we wanted to structure Castle Builder in the same way. So those books are our cousins. They're companion books, or they're companion series. So they're completely different material, of course, because we don't talk about defensive structures to a great extent in City Builder. But yeah, the whole intent with Castle Builder is that it is the series, and then the final book are structured the same way as City Builder, and they are intended to complement each other.
Yeah, and also wanting to play off of that is when Mike and I discussed this, I saw Castle Builder as being a complementary volume, because where City Builder mostly talks about how these structures function, my series is all about how to make them work, like from the inside out, from the monetary perspective, how to use them. Like why would you build them in the first place? Where would you put them? What's their purpose? Some structures probably won't work in a city as well as others. I mean, like a keep, but if you put the keep somewhere with actual military installations in the United States, like Fort Knox. I mean, not Fort Knox. Fort Riley, Kansas. The town Junction City was built because of the base was put there.
Right.
I mean, originally it was called Camp Center, and it just grew into what's now Fort Riley. But Junction City is a result of people living next to the base, either soldiers who, after they got out of the service, just decided to stay in the town, or whatever. But this is an entire city that grew up to support, like the military base in terms of economic structures. So I mean that's where I saw some of these buildings possibly playing in a role in terms of cities.
Right.
And Will, you've read City Builder and Castle Builder, I assume, and how do you compare the two? Do they have the similarities, or are they fundamentally different books?
No, I mean the similarity. I guess really the similarity just it comes from the format and the way information is kind of divided up and parsed out. But with Castle Builder, you're just much more heavily focusing on the structure itself and what it does, not necessarily how it's going to engage with every other part of like the whole giant city. A castle can kind of get away with being a castle on a hill.
Right. So, Mike, what is when do we know when Volume 4 is coming out?
Well, we don't know when it's coming out, but our plan, ideally, was to release one volume a month in the series. But we haven't really been able to stay on top of that. We had a pretty busy convention season. So we actually came out with Volume 2 earlier this year. Volume 3 was delayed a lot more than we would have liked it to have been. Richard and I have already started pulling together art for Volume 4, and ideally we'll release Volume 4 in October. And then Volume 5 November, Volume 6 in December. So we would like to get back to that monthly schedule.
Yeah. Part of the problem was, in addition to having finished school and going through some transitional stuff myself, I had to overcome the learning curve for the mapping software that I used. Mm-hmm. So that was one of the biggest gaps in the releases between Volume 1 and Volume 2, and then from 2 to 3, because one of the tools that I used was for arrow slits. And if you look at the floor plan for the bunker that the pillbox that I included in the in Volume 3 at the end, that was one of the tools that was the hardest to learn how to use, because it's not a standard tool that came with the program. It was an add-on. And so I had to learn the tricks to make that function properly, so that way I could use it and get it to the scale that I needed, and make sure that the alcoves that the archers would sit in weren't too deep, but at the same time they weren't so wide that they became unbelievable or structurally unsound in terms of the map. So that's pretty much where that went. Volume 4 is written. The only thing that hasn't been done is the maps and the map key. And part of that is because one of the things that I do with all of my maps is I sit down and I think about the idea that I want for the structure, and I ask myself, if I was going to make this building for myself, if I was this character, how would I put this together? Where would I put things? And it's the same questions that I asked in Volume 1. So I'm trying to stay true to the material that I've done. So that's been a part of the delay as well. But Volume 4 is, like I said, for the most part, is finished other than the maps. And I just have to figure out where to put the rooms. I pretty much have an idea of the number of floors for the two different sample structures. It's just, where on each floor certain rooms will go. And then it'll be done.
And I like to let Richard work at his own pace on this for two main reasons. One, soon is nice, but right is still always better than soon. So, I like him to be able to get it to the point where he's confident in it. But then once he passes on the materials to me, and I have to edit them, do the layout, do the design, everyone just imagines that is a magic, instantaneous process. So Richard sends me the stuff, and then he IMs me and says, "Is it ready yet? When is it going to be released?" So I'm usually not in a hurry to start dealing with that. So I don't harass him to get the stuff to me, so that God willing, he won't harass me once the stuff crosses my desk. But that said, we've worked together pretty well on this series, and it bears mentioning. I don't know if we mentioned this. Castle Builder Volume 1 and Castle Builder Volume 2 are both silver bestsellers on DriveThruRPG. They became copper bestsellers within a week of their release and hit silver bestseller and have held those positions for several months now. So people have picked up these books, looked at them, and said, "Oh, this is something I can use." We're sticking with the skirmisher model of being earnest and useful with this series.
I actually have a question from the internet. I have a friend of mine, Trevor, who's watching. Is going to give us some notes. He actually had a question for you, Richard. And what mapping software are you using?
I use Campaign Cartographer 3 mostly because it's really reliable. I mean, yes, it has a steep learning curve, but once you get past that learning curve, it becomes incredibly useful. Just the amount of detail you can put on maps, how well you can manipulate the buildings to do what you want. I mean, if there isn't a component that you really need, you can either make it with the software itself, or you can resize other things to play tricks with the software, so the end product looks really good.
I've never used that before. Do you use what mapping software, Will, for your games?
Actually, no. Usually, I either do the depending on what we're doing. If it's an environment I hadn't planned on, I usually just use. I've got a dry erase battle map that I use. Just quickly sketch out the map with different things in different colors, just so that there's an idea of what's forest, what's cover, what's water. If it's something that I've planned, I will usually have done it up in Photoshop and printed it out.
And does Euripides use any mapping software?
Let me check.
You may can ask him for me.
While I am familiar with Campaign Cartographer, I much prefer to use the imagination. I will set the scene with a basic description of the environment, and then let roleplay take its course.
Yes. Thank you, Euripides.
You're welcome, sir.
Now, Mike, I know you have a lot of the Dwarven Forge stuff, and I've been fortunate to play with that a couple of times. You've collected that over the years, I guess?
Yeah, more or less. I don't have a lot of their newest stuff. But we used to have a relationship with Dwarven Forge, and we actually created maps for a couple of our books, including Tests of Skill and Experts V.3.5 that have maps based on Dwarven Forge components. We haven't, done anything like that with them for a couple of years, and now we're at the point where we're actually producing a lot of our maps in-house. So when I need a map now, I talk to Richard or I talk to Will.
Always good to have those kinds of people on hand.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wanted to move on to the next topic for tonight and talk just quickly about the Dungeons and Dragons documentary. There was a Kickstarter that ended just a few days ago. They funded, I think, just under $200,000, which was about 25% over their goal. So I'm very happy they're getting it going. But I think one of the interesting things that I got from the trailer was that they were looking at the history of the game. And, I think every Dungeons and Dragons player has a different history because all our games are different. We play with different people. We have different characters and stuff. So everyone's history is different. But I want to start with Will and talk to you and tell me about your D&D history and how you started and where you got to where you are today.
Just D&D specifically, or just role-playing in general?
Role-playing in general, but touch on D&D for sure.
Well, okay. Well, I guess as far as D&D goes, my shameful secret is that I have been in more D&D games that have never been played than I've been in any actual campaigns or one-shots. I have made tons of characters and written tons of backgrounds and done all sorts of prep work to play in games that then no one else ever showed up to. It's a very small handful of games that I've actually played. That being said, I have had a real good time. The first time I ever actually played D&D was actually with one of my brother's friends back in I guess it had to have been 96 because I remember specifically I was the one driving with my brother out to his house, and I played a dwarf fighter. We fought some lizard men and an octopus in a cave, which I defeated by pouring strong alcohol into its pit and got it too drunk to fight.
Nice.
So that was my first real experience with D&D. My first experience with a role-playing game was my good friend Todd Carr had gotten into Shadowrun, and my first real exposure to it is he was trying to explain to me what Shadowrun was, and I didn't quite get it. And then a year later, when I was really starting to get into Japanese animation, a role-playing game based on Project A-ko came out. And I picked it up and I loved it. I could never find anybody to play it with. This is before I had discovered the Friendly Local Game Shop campaign headquarters back in Norfolk, Virginia. I didn't actually start playing till another year after that, when I found a copy of the role-playing game Teenagers from Outer Space, which is a hilarious role-playing game. And I started doing a campaign of that with my friend Todd, my friend Greg, my brother Robert, and that was really, really fun. And then, like, you know, we did a short 3-part campaign with Teenagers from Outer Space, and then took, like, the campaign was alternative.
Okay, looks like Will might be having an internet problem. So, Mike, what about you? Where did your role-playing game history begin?
You know, it's pretty amazing to consider that I started playing Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons was my first role-playing game. So sort of a classic experience there. And I started playing that the summer of 1982. So a hair over 30 years ago. I played my first D&D game, and the very first scenario I played was a scenario designed by my friend Paul Knorr. He was my first DM, but that was one session, and by session 2, we were into Keep on the Borderlands, Dungeon Module B2, which features the Caves of Chaos, and just within the last couple of months, right on the 30th anniversary of my playing my first game, I was DMing Caves of Chaos for my group of new gamers here in Texas country. So, you know, that was a great classic adventure, and, you know, I think it's you know, the music that we listen to when we're in high school is the music that's always our favorite music for the rest of our lives. I think some of those first dungeon modules we played through are our favorite adventures for the rest of our lives. So anytime I can DM someone who has never played in one of those classic first adventures I played in, I try to give it a shot. So yeah, I've been playing role-playing games for 30 years. I've played a lot of different games. I've published a number of different games, but essentially I fall back when I DM and when I play, I fall back on playing D&D. I run a D20/OGL 3.5 game. That is what my home game is, and that's that. You know, to me that was the best system, the final evolution of a great system. I love it. That's what I play. That's what I DM, and increasingly, I've been going back to the old notebooks that I still have from the 1980s, mostly the 1980s. You know, 25 and 30-year-old notebooks, and culling material from them and rolling them into the material that we're developing today. So this is a full circle kind of thing. I didn't just start playing 30 years ago. I'm now rolling into what I'm doing now. A lot of the ideas and concepts developed to a greater or better extent, but now incorporating those concepts into what we're doing today.
Yeah, and I've had that same experience in the past where, you know, I started probably the next summer in '83 when I started playing Dungeons & Dragons in the Red Box, which I believe is the same thing you started with, Mike.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Right. So,
I love that Red Box.
Yeah, and it, you know, it's really classic, and you know, the adventure that was built into it was great, kind of haunted mansion sort of thing. A carrion crawler right in the beginning that comes out of the wall.
That was the haunted. That was the haunted moat house.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. So it was kind of a classic thing. But I played mostly that red box until the early '90s when I picked up Shadowrun. Shadowrun First Edition was like real huge in the group that I played with, and then shortly thereafter I switched to Vampire the Masquerade and its games as well, mostly Mage, but I tried everything they did. Mage was great. The only problem with Mage is if you had a crappy DM, a storyteller, it was awful. It was awful. If you had a great DM, it was great. And maybe that's true for every game, but I think for Mage it was especially true. Yeah. Then I picked up 3.5. I was working for Wizards of the Coast in 2004, and that was right after they released 3.5. So I picked that up and went on with that. And then now I've switched to Pathfinder. But for the most part, that's what I play is Pathfinder, and I play a few other things, some indie games that I've picked up here or there, things like that. But for the most part, it's all Pathfinder now, and I'm developing in Pathfinder. I'm bringing all those notes and stuff from the old days to Pathfinder, so it's really pushing me forward. Richard, do you have a bunch of books like that?
Yeah, I have a huge collection of material. I mean, I started gaming in 1980, so I guess I've been gaming longer than anybody else here.
Yeah, you have.
I was 4 when my uncle first introduced me to Dungeons and Dragons because he had all the first edition AD&D books. Mm-hmm. And I had no idea what the hell I was looking at for the most part because I still was in the process of trying to learn how to read. I could look at the numbers and I knew what those meant, but for the most part, I didn't really get all that much into it. And so he kind of did a makeshift version of things where he used a lot of trivia questions to replace most of the combat mechanics, things like that. Huh. And I actually learned how to develop games from him. He taught me to play chess when I was 4 as well. So I went from chess and D&D, like a modified version of D&D, to playing games like Risk and Dominoes. And so by the time I was 5, I was designing my own board games. That's how I got started in all this. And and at that same time, when I finally learned how to read, I would go through the monster manuals, especially Monster Manual 2. And to this day, my favorite monster from all of D&D is the Modron. I mean, that's one of the things that drew me into Planescape in the first place is because of Monster Manual 2. But so I worked from Monster Manual 2 to the DMG. And I tried to read that thing, and I was confused. Obviously, Gary used some words in there that no kid is ever going to know what they mean.
Written in high Gygaxian.
Yeah, so it was really difficult to read it, but I mean it was pretty fun. So I mean, the thing that I think I stuck with the most when I was trying to go through the books, it was. The section at the back of the DMG, which really caught my attention, which is the dice games and the gambling games that were like slot machines and stuff like that, and those are really cool, and especially when all the other materials like way beyond anything you can do. Here's something in the back of the book that was really simple. And so those things are pretty much what got me started. And my uncle, he also had Fiend Folio, which has, the infamous Flumph and, all those good monsters in it. But I think like everybody else, my first experience was with the red box. And when I bought my first set, D&D materials that I purchased, and I still have that book as torn up as it is. I still have my original red and blue boxes, from the Minster version of basic, expert, companion, all the way up, and. So for me, the adventure that stands out the most is Isle of Dread.
Oh yeah,
because it came with the blue box. So I got started on that, and then from there I just built a library of like D&D. I have like every edition of the game except for the Moldvay Basic, and I have a lot of White Wolf books from the Classic World of Darkness, as well as literally all but 20, maybe 20 books of the New World of Darkness, and I have a lot of Shadowrun 4th edition. Wow, what else do I have? I don't know. I lost. Oh, I even have a copy, and I even tried to run Cyborg Commando. I don't know if any of you.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
That was old TSR game, wasn't it?
No, that was actually New Infinities. That was one of the first companies Gary tried to do when he left
That's
TSR.
right.
And interestingly enough, I found it at a dollar store. And I bought the box set for $1, and I actually tried to run that game unsuccessfully, like everyone else, but I still tried to run it. And I also have the Dangerous Journey system, which is a really good system, poorly organized, which, what I understand, is a huge problem for most GDW products. But I have that, and along with Space 1889, which is really fun. I mean, it's probably one of the best steampunk games ever written, despite some of the organization issues that make it a little difficult to try to run it. But, I mean, I have a huge collection. I don't know. I mean, some of the books I have, I don't even know why I got them or like how long ago I acquired them, because I just have that large of a library now.
Yeah, it's like my copy of Chill that I have sitting on the shelf. It's like, well, why is this here? Why do I have this?
That's how I am with my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle books.
Right.
Yeah, it's like, why did I get these? Oh, they're turtles. That's why.
I did that. Yeah, I did that with the Robotech books as well. You know, I wanted the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle books, but I couldn't get them, so I went with the next best thing that I could for Palladium, which was Robotech, because I was like, you know, I'm gonna get my anime fix. And I also have Besom 2nd and 3rd editions.
Cool. Did you ever get the cute fuzzy cockfighting seizure monsters?
Yeah, I got the PDF of that. It's hilarious.
That is an amazing supplement.
Yeah, it is. I think that one was really underrated because not a lot of people really got that it was really tongue-in-cheek, making fun of a lot of the pocket monster shows that came out of Japan during the early 90s.
My favorite part was there was like an alternate timeline of what human history would be like if like little tiny fighting monsters existed, and there was a whole thing about like World War I Russian soldiers out on the tundra having to eat their Pokemon to survive the harsh winter. There's this illustration of these like guys in like big like Bolshevik hats, and there's like some sort of weird creature roasting on a spit, and they're all huddled together for warmth.
It actually makes me think of mentioning timelines in games. It makes me think of the timeline for I actually also have 5th edition Hero, which has this really long timeline to account for all of their material. But Cyberpunk 2020, which the timeline is now outdated because by the year 2020, the Soviet Union has its own oil company called Sov Oil, which obviously doesn't exist. So I mean, it's pretty interesting looking at some of the stuff from a historical perspective, just how far the game has come, if nothing else.
And Star Trek has a similar problem. I know Star Trek's not gaming, but it's still a fandom.
Well, FASA did an RPG for it, so.
Right, exactly. Star Trek there in World War III was in 1992 or something.
I think it was 97, but you're right. Yeah. And then I think the eugenics wars are supposed to be happening right now.
Right.
And so they are.
Let's move on to the next topic that I want to talk about. And we actually have touched briefly on it, but I want to talk about what we're playing right now. We're all playing new games. Mike, I know at Space City Con you picked up Red Shirts and posted recently that you tried that out. Maybe you can talk about the game for a minute and tell us how it played out with you and your wife.
Red Shirts is a fun game. It's a card game. I actually played it with my wife and our associate John Kadolf and his wife came over a couple of weeks ago, and we played it with them as well. Suffice it to say, this game can be played with 2 to 6 people. 4 is better than 2, as with a lot of these games, because you really get much more of a dynamic going. But essentially, it's a card game. That is, in fact, they don't say this in the card game. They can't, but I can say it because I'm not the publisher of the game. It's a Star Trek tribute game. Right. And the whole idea is that you are in charge of an away team of red shirts, and there are various missions you have to try to accomplish, and your goal is to fail at those missions. The game is kind of counterintuitive. It really is. You really do have to kind of get your mind around it. It's a little more difficult than you would think. Your job is to fail on those missions and be the first player who runs out of red shirts because you've annihilated your entire away team. So the goal of the other players is then to intervene and play cards that help you to succeed at your mission. So the other players are helping you to succeed. You're trying to fail and get your entire squad of red shirts wiped out. So it's fun. It's counterintuitive. I wouldn't say that it's ever going to be my favorite game. You know, it's got its limitations. It's a fun game. It's a cute game. I'd say it's probably slightly better in concept than it is in execution. I think they probably needed a couple months more play testing before they released it. So I'd say it's a good game that has a lot of fun playability associated with it, but it's not necessarily a great game that you're just going to fall back on for years and years and years as your party game. So I think it's worth taking a look at, but I think it does have its limitations. And John Kadoff is going to be posting a detailed review of it on D-Infinity online sometime within the next couple of weeks. So on our next show, we can put up the link for John Kadoff's review of Red Shirts.
That would be great. You know, and that sounds like a very fun game, a very silly game.
It is fun. It is fun.
Right. And one game that we played when you were down here for Space City was Lords of Waterdeep. And I've been playing that quite a bit in my board gaming. My wife and I play it. It actually works really well as a two-player game. It's kind of a Euro game. It has very few random elements, some card elements mainly. But we had a lot of fun with it. It seems to be a really solid game. The other thing I've been playing is we're about to start a new Pathfinder game. We're going to be using Defects. From Skirmisher, which we're really enjoying. Well, one of the characters that turned in, he's taken the Schizoid defect, which changes his alignment randomly every day.
I think who wrote that defect? Did Will write that defect?
I think I did.
I didn't write it. I think Will might have written that.
Yeah, I wrote two. There's like Schizoid, and then there's Extremely Schizoid, where the alignment changes are even broader.
Mine are more fundamental. I mean, I wrote the very first defects for our book Nuisances, which I think we released. Good Lord, when did that come out? 2005 maybe, the first edition of that. It's been a while, but mine were fairly fundamental and to some extent misogynistic. So the defect bitch, that was one that I wrote up, and a lot of them were in fact based on life experience. I don't think I've ever written a defect that I had not observed in action in somebody else. To me, it's not a defect if I haven't actually seen it working. So that's how I know it's a defect. So Won't Look Down is based, for example, on my wife kicking the cat food dishes around the kitchen. It's bad enough to constantly be kicking the cat food dishes around the kitchen. Imagine if you were in a dungeon that had all such a pressure plate and tripwire traps and you had that defect. Yeah, my defects are all based on real life observation.
And Will, have you used defects in your games?
I really, really want to. The main problem, like I love, like not just because I've written and illustrated a lot of them. I love the mechanics of them. It's just that the group that I've been gaming with, I have not dug into Pathfinder yet. The last campaign we did with them was Savage Worlds. Although the defects have been on my mind just this week. I'd finished up some illustrations for defects. This is the ink for the illustration for the defect chew materials, where your character is compelled to nibble on their material components for their spells. And I don't know if you can tell this, but our necromancer here is nibbling on some mistletoe, which is a very bad idea.
And a lot of the defects are in a sense puns. So when I look at the name of something in the game that I think is, maybe a little preposterous or worthy of making fun of, like the feet eschew materials. I take a look at the feet eschew materials and I say, oh, defect chew materials. So then you have a character who's compelled to actually munch on his material components. And Will and I are in fact working on an entire book of defects right now.
Oh yeah.
Right, we're playtesting them in my Pathfinder game now, so that's one that's from Jester's Dragon. So we're excited to be using that in our game. And Will, you were talking about defects, but what have you been playing recently?
What have I been playing? Well, I've been actually a lot of board games. I've sort of rediscovered Catan after getting back from Gen Con. I've been playing a lot of that. Also been playing, anytime I can get people to do it, Betrayal in the House on the Hill. I'm really into horror games right now. So Betrayal in the House on the Hill, and also the
That's a good game.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Rob introduced me to that game, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. Oh, and check out, now it's on DVD. Check out Cabin in the Woods. That might as well be
nice
the Betrayal
movie.
of the House on the Hill movie. But then also a bit of Mansions of Madness.
Yeah, I played Arkham Horror for the first time.
Oh, that's a great game.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, speaking of Arkham Horror, I'm going to be at Con on the Cobb in October, and I've got all the expansions for Arkham Horror. So one of the things I'm going to be doing, I'm going to set up the whole game with every expansion, and we're going to see how long that lasts.
8 or 9 hours of it.
Unless all the investigators die before then.
That's pretty hardcore.
What about you, Richard? Have you been playing anything fun?
No, not so much playing things. I've been mostly reading and writing for the most part. Unfortunately, part of the problem of moving away from where I was when I went to school is that I don't have a gaming group at the moment. So other than working and trying to find a more steady source of income, because freelancing doesn't it's kind of a hit or miss thing. Other than doing that, I've just been spending most of my time reading games. So I mean, and that's actually I think where I started doing the blog in the first place, with the different aspects of the anatomy of game design, of those particular elements, because I don't really have anything else to do at the moment in terms of games. So it's kind of it's like a gaming doldrum around here.
I have had plenty of those in my life, years-long doldrums.
Well, this just gives us more reason for one of these videos to play something right here
Right.
on the stream.
That's a smart idea.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much what I've been doing, is a lot of game-related stuff. In fact, some of the books that I've been reading have surprisingly contained things discussing games, which made me happy. But for the most part, within the work I did for Volume 3, I also did a project, 24-hour design challenge project, which was fun. Mm-hmm. And so that's pretty much what my gaming experiences have been reduced to these days, is mostly in the design department, and maybe a couple of casual, social games like SimCity Social. Because there's not really a lot of time for me to do much else, and I'm not sure where I can find a local gaming group that will be accommodating for some of my scheduling issues at the moment.
Right. Well, I have an infant daughter. She's 8 months old, so I understand exactly what you're talking about. I have to bring people to me usually, and that can be difficult for some groups. I want to move on to the next section. Normally we would have a Q&A. We'd have questions from the audience. Since this is our first show, we don't have any questions from the audience. So I wanted to do a round robin, starting with Richard. If you have a question for one of us. If not, maybe you could talk about something you're working on currently.
Well, I was just kind of curious as to what you guys are working on as projects, because I try to let people know what I'm working on, either through Facebook or let Mike know what's going on for the most part, and try to stay in the loop with people. So I'm just curious what you guys are working on.
Mike, why don't you go first?
Well, let me ask. Is there going to be another point in the show where we're talking about what we're reading, or is this that point in the show?
You can talk about that. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, because I could either hold off on that. Okay. I'm working on a number of different things. We just finished the Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting Kickstarter, Skirmishers Kickstarter project, to fund the art and production for our own homegrown campaign setting. So I'm working on that to some extent right now. Will and I have been working together, him mostly, but I've been giving feedback on the maps that we're doing for the campaign setting. Will is working on those. But more immediately, we have a tie-in project. It's a multi-author fiction anthology that's going to be coming out in November called Swords of Kos Hecaton. And actually, I talk about this like you guys have never heard of it, but every single one of you has either written or is writing a story for the anthology. So here I am describing this thing, but...
all those people out there haven't seen it.
Richard has a great story called Chasing Shadows, which has some interesting twists to it. Just the whole premise behind the story is an interesting twist. Rob has got a great story called Eugenos and the Green Griffin, which focuses on the tension between two groups of racetrack fans. That's one of the backstories in Kos. And then Will, I haven't given you your daily pester. I haven't said, where is your story? So I guess I'll do that right now. But so I'm actually editing the submissions for the anthology right now, commissioning art. Each one of the stories, of the dozen stories in Hecaton, Swords of Kos Hecaton, is going to have a custom piece of art commissioned to accompany it. So I'm commissioning the art. I'm looking at the sketches that are coming in from the artists. I'm trying to impress upon them. They need to kind of hustle up a little bit because we have to have a dozen images done in time to release this within about the next 30 days. I'm getting ready to move it into layout and design. And within about a month or so, we're going to be going to print and getting ready to release Swords of Kos Hecaton, which is a fiction anthology set in the world of Kos. And it's the follow-on to my novel, Swords of Kos Necropolis, which is, in fact, the first book in the Swords of Kos series. And that beautiful cover illustration is by Amanda Call, who is a wonderful artist who's doing a bunch of the images for Hecaton and for the Swords of Kos fantasy campaign setting. So that's a big part of what I've been working on. Right. Something peripheral to all that I've been reading is Will brought to my attention that Jack Vance's company, Spatterlight Press, was looking for writers to do synopses of some of Jack Vance's books. So for anyone who has not heard of Jack Vance, you need to check out his Dying Earth series.
Yeah, I have that right here.
The first book in his Dying Earth series he wrote in 1944. It's been retitled Mazirian the Magician. So what Richard just held up, called The Dying Earth, is now called Mazirian the Magician. It's 6 stories under one cover. And that's what I'm reading right now. I'm reading this fantasy book that was written in 1944. Why is this book relevant to anyone today? Because the magic system in Dungeons & Dragons is modeled on what Jack Vance postulated a magic system should be when he wrote that in 1944. So not only is this a seminal swords and sorcery fantasy book, it is a seminal proto-gaming book. So I'm reading Jack Vance right now. I'm reading some of the very first and best swords and sorcery fiction, and writing synopses of it because Jack Vance's son, John Vance, who I'm working with on this, needs them to be able to present what his father's work was about. So that's what I'm reading.
Well, I've actually started doing the outline on the. I don't know if it'll be the next Swords of Kos novel, but a Swords of Kos novel about my character Eugenos from Eugenos and the Green Griffin. So I've started that outline just yesterday. So and I've got
wonderful
3,000 words already. So
oh wow, great. That's great.
I'm really putting a lot of my creative energy into it. The other thing we've been working on for a while, is our bi-weekly Pathfinder e-zine of sorts, Dungeon Keepers and Dragon Slayers, which Will is working on some stuff for it too. So that's those are really the two big things that I've been working on.
And don't publicly state what the abbreviation for Dungeon Keepers and Dragon Slayers is.
No ampersands. No ampersands. So and it's going to look at different facets of Pathfinder. There's always going to be new monsters, new equipment, new spells, crunchy bits. We're also going to have lore. We're going to have stuff about Kos. I hope
we'll support Kos with that publication, won't we?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have lots of Kos stuff. We've already started doing write-ups of various parts of it, and so it's gonna take care of all that and going to be intermingled with all the Co stuff. So Will, I have a question for you, sir.
Yep.
Where is your story?
Where it is still traveling from the brain through the fingers into the keyboard, which does not show up on my webcam, and into the ever-expanding Word document that is always glaring at me now rather aggressively from the desktop.
That's me, actually.
But it's the story is the Old Gods of Kos. It's about a pair of thieves, but they're a husband and wife. They're husband and wife thieves, and it begins with them running a con during a big festival to celebrate the Olympian gods' victory over the Titans, the Titanomachia, and in the course of running this con, they end up discovering that there's this old outlawed cult from 100 years ago that still secretly exists in the city of Kos, and wherever you have a secret cult, you have a bejeweled idol. So it's all about them planning and executing a heist to infiltrate the cult and steal the jewels off the idol.
It's classic. I mean, when you first described this story to me a long time ago, I was really impressed with it. I mean, you sold me on it the first time you told me about it, and essentially your pair of thieves. I mean, this is, correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially you are deriving elements both from Fritz Lieber's Lankmar books. You're drawing on those to some extent, but you're really also drawing on, what is it, the Thin Man movie?
The Thin Man, yeah. Nick and Nora Charles from The Thin Man is where a lot of the inspiration for the... If they were crooks and didn't solve mysteries, if they were responsible for the criminal acts...
In a fantasy world, it would be these two.
Yeah, they're very much in love. They're very much in love.
They
love wine, and they're very smart, and they love applying their cleverness to pulling off interesting crimes.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It's going to be a great story, and it'll be one of the pieces that's in Hackathon. So yeah,
and it's characters you'll be seeing again. I'm definitely going to do other stories with them. I am planning on statting them up for Pathfinder if people want to use them as NPCs in their own campaigns. Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be a big part of what we're doing after the campaign setting is released, is releasing various parts for Kos in the various systems that we like to play. So we might see write-ups in Pathfinder, we might see write-ups in Savage World, and so on.
Well, that's right, because that bears mentioning. The Swords of Kos fantasy campaign setting is universal. It's system non-specific. The campaign setting itself doesn't include any game stats. So when somebody picks up a copy of the Swords of Kos fantasy campaign setting, they can use it with any rules. They can use it as a backdrop for any games. And then we will create Pathfinder material, OGL 3.5 material, really material suitable for any system. Any of us that want to generate material for any system can generate Kos material that ties in with it, and then we'll make that available in one way or another for people who like the Kos setting and want material that is directly affiliated with it.
Right, and if you want to be a part of the community, you can head over to skirmisher.com and click on forum. We'd love to have people join us and create stuff. All four of us are very active on those boards, so we. Go ahead, Will.
Oh, actually, I was saying on the subject of forums, something definitely to check out. Just this morning, I posted it's the thread "Butt Kicking Feats for Kicking Butts."
I saw that.
It's just a whole bunch of Pathfinder feats, all based around using your feet in combat.
That's great.
Yeah, lots of good material in there.
So, what about you, Richard?
Well, a lot of the stuff that I've been doing is blog related for the most part. Other than, like I mentioned, the 24-hour design challenge that I did with Savage Mojo, which was really fun. It was the first time I've ever participated in anything like that, and it was just a really interesting event. And I would love to do something like that again. It was such a great opportunity to collaborate with people, and it was just kind of crazy, in terms of like just the sheer amount of work that was done in such a short time. I finished Volume 3 and kicked that over to Mike.
Right.
I wrote a blog post on modifiers for role-playing games, and I started with board games and then moved to war games, and the sections that have yet to come out deal specifically with different role-playing games. I finished up the last 2 segments for the Lawful Good Truth series that I've been doing.
Right.
And started going into describing 5 different types of interpretations of the alignment, and for the most part, like ways that people might apply the alignment that still are in keeping with it, but might come across as being a little less than perfect.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So the intent of the entire series, if I can get through the entire series, which would be all 9 alignments, would be a treatment of the same things, like what you see in the book. In any D20 OGL product, what you see is the description of the ideal of that alignment.
Right.
And
Good
then
point.
the 5 different presentations are ways to further enhance play by looking at people who, through whatever lens they choose to view their alignment through, that's how they carry it out. And one of the things I'm trying to do as well is show the character as not just a hero, but like a villain, because I'm not sure if any of you have seen the 2nd edition book on villains for AD&D, but they presented a section on how you could use a lawful good character as a villain. And I thought it was an interesting thing. It's like, if you have a character who's working, well, if you think about a character who's working at a cross purpose from you because of either their cultural or their religious doctrine or what have you, might be such a way that they interpret your actions as being detrimental to their own goals or to the things that they uphold.
And that's the premise of 50% of all martial arts movies, that you have 2 heroes that essentially they're both heroes, but they're battling each other for the first 80% of the movie, because even though they're heroes, they're operating at cross purposes. And it's only in the final scene of the movie that they actually come together and collaborate.
Right.
It's like any time 2 superheroes meet for the first time, they have to beat each other up a little bit before they join forces and fight the supervillain.
Yeah, and so that was kind of the motif that I was going for with some of these things, to show that these can happen, but what happens, and this is the last installment for the overall paper, the Lawful Good Truth, is what happens when you take it to the conclusion where that point is not met. What happens if they don't realize that they're on the same side? Right. And that's essentially what Greek tragedy is about. It's like, the fall of a hero because of the sin of hamartia, of pride. They've overstepped their bounds and they have to pay the price, but they're not able to see what it is that their flaw really is. Mm-hmm. And if they don't make amends for it before it's too late, even though they're heroes, they eventually suffer from it because they can't see what it is that's causing them to fall.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're starting to run out of time. I'm going to give everybody a last word for tonight, and then we're going to call Volume 0 of D-Infinity Live done. Just want to tell everybody once again, you can read Richard's blog at skirmisher.com. You can find it there, and all of our blogs are there as well. Come join us on the forums. If you have any questions for D-Infinity Live, we're going to set up a forum in the forums section. You can also email us from the website. We'll be happy to answer your questions. Facebook, Twitter, whatever. We'll have all that down in the underbar. If you'd like to be updated on when we're running, please click subscribe above us, and you'll be able to see exactly when we're running the show. Our goal is to run it on Thursday nights at 8 o'clock. So you can join us for an hour of lively discussion. And remember, we want you guys out there in the audience to be a part of our show. So please interact with us and be a part of what we're doing. So I'm going to give Will, what's your last word for tonight?
Oh, just that you were talking about the Dungeons and Dragons documentary and our beginnings with role-playing games. I've got right here the very first dice bag with my very first gaming dice set in it. This has survived dog attacks, cat attacks, 7 moves. I think it's missing a string. It's you can see it's got all sorts of wear and tear. It's missing 2 dice, not because I lost them, but because when Gary Gygax passed away, they had this at Gen Con. They had this giant hollow D20, and they wanted to have the roll the largest dice pool in the history of gaming in honor of Gary. But they wanted people to donate dice, and the dice were going to be auctioned off for charity. So I donated my D10 out of the set to that. And then a year or two later, Arneson died, and they tried to break that record. So I donated my first percentile dice out of this for that. So it's I don't know. It's certainly the history of this dice bag isn't nearly as rich as the history of D&D, but I like that it's storied.
Yeah, and that's those kinds of stories I think are what important. My last word for tonight is also related to history of our gaming lives. I ran across some stuff at my mom's house recently that was college ruled paper or whatever I was using in middle school, and I had created this war game essentially where I had assigned points to infantry and points to tanks and points to planes, and you would have them and you would have paper and dice, and it's really fascinating to look back at stuff that you did at a younger age with these older eyes and say, well, how can I make this better, or can it be made better?
Yeah.
It wasn't just a childhood thing. So, for me, D&D wasn't necessarily about just Dungeons and Dragons. It brought me into a whole world of gaming. So I think that's a really important last word. Richard, how about you, sir? What's your last word for the evening?
Yeah, well, I was actually happy to hear that the Kickstarter project got funded in part because I think, if for no other reason, Dungeons & Dragons is an important piece of history. It's a culmination of a lot of things that have made the modern world possible in a pen and paper format. I mean, a lot of things from information theory to cultural discussions, as well as the way we interact with each other, those are all rooted in some way, shape, or form to what Dungeons & Dragons has helped create.
Yep, that's true. And Mike, since you're the owner and operator, the boss, as it were, I thought I would give you the last word on this very first episode.
Well,
What's no love for me? Well, my last word is thank you very much. Left in a huff there.
I'm clearly not much of a boss because I've begged you not to call me the boss any number of times. So clearly, as the boss, my word has no weight whatsoever. But I would say my last word is, the convention. The summers are always really busy. That's the convention season for us. I don't even call it the summer. I call it the convention season. And for us, it included some big conventions this year where Skirmisher and D-Infinity both had major presences. So Comicpalooza, Space City Con, OwlCon, all Houston conventions. Houston is a megalopolis, and it is becoming a convention city, and it is the city that has the conventions where Skirmisher can have a major presence. So that was a big part of the summer and spring for us. And now we're in a production mode. So Castle Builder Volume 3 was the first publication we've come out with in a while because we've been so busy. And now pretty much moving forward, we're going to be releasing one publication of some ilk, if not every week. There's not going to be more than 2 weeks in between new releases between now and the end of the year. So we are in intensive production mode. And people who like any of our stuff are just going to be seeing a lot more of it over the next 3 or 4 months.
It's going to be a busy time for us all. I'm really excited about that moving forward. So that's going to do it for us tonight. Remember, you can catch us back here next Thursday at 8 p.m. On behalf of Michael Barola, Richard Balsley, William Thrasher, I'm Robert Gruber. Thank you, and good night.
Night.
Good